Hey BookTube, it's Sarah and welcome back to my channel, The Book Bag. So February is Black History Month in addition to being, the month of love with Valentine's Day. So I thought I would talk about and recommend some of my favorite books by Black authors and that feature Black characters. Of course, during Black History Month, it's always nice to spotlight Black authors, but really we should be reading books by Black authors and featuring Black characters all throughout the year and not just performatively being like, oh look, I read one book by one Black author for Black History Month. And it's also important to read diversely and to really read across different worldviews and perspectives that may not be the same as your own to, broaden your understanding of the world, gain deeper empathy for people, and just be an all-around better human. But I thought since it's Black History Month, I would give you guys some recommendations for books by Black authors that I really enjoyed as just a way to help you diversify your bookshelves. Alright, so the first book I have is The Skin We're In by Desmond Cole. This is the most on-the-nose book of this video for Black History Month. It's a Canadian book, actually. It's nonfiction, and it is about Desmond Cole's experience as a Black man in Canada, specifically in Toronto, and as a reporter. So he was speaking out against racial discrimination and carding and stuff within the Toronto police force, and he wrote a column about it and then was fired from his newspaper. So he decided to dig deeper into the racism that he was experiencing and witnessing in Toronto, and this is the book that came out of that. So I gave this book 5 stars. It's a pretty short book. It's a fairly quick read, but I found it quite eye-opening because in Canada, a lot of the times we consume a lot of news from the United States of America, and we see a lot of racism and stuff there, and in Canada it's very common to hear white people go, oh, but we're not like that. That's not us. We're much better than them, which isn't true. We also have a very racist history. Our country is incredibly racist, lots of genocide and stuff. It's not great. But I feel like this book really opened my eyes to the Black experience living in Canada, specifically Toronto. And this book just encouraged me to look into more resources about racism in Canada and the Black Lives Matter movement, specifically in Canada, to understand what my country was going through rather than just, being like, those darn Americans, as we tend to do in the Great White North. So the next book is Hood Feminism by Mikki Kendall. So this is another adult nonfiction book. So this book talks about feminism in ways that it isn't always discussed in the mainstream or by white feminists. It deals with issues more of housing issues and food inequality and education issues that tend to affect women of color as well as women of lower socioeconomic classes. And it's a really good intro to intersectional feminism because it talks about how poverty and race and gender all intersect and connect and cause different issues than if you were, a white woman, you wouldn't be experiencing the same issues that a Black woman is facing. And if you're a Black woman who is more affluent, you would not be facing the same issues that a Black woman in a lower socioeconomic class would be facing. I thought it was a really good introduction to this idea of intersectionality and how the different parts of your identity can clash. And kind of the thesis of it is the kind of feminism that women living in the quote-unquote hood would need that white feminism does not help and in fact hinders their progress. So I gave this book 5 stars as well. I do think it was aimed more at me being a white woman. It's definitely more of an introduction and a teaching you about the different kinds of feminism you might not understand or different issues that you may not be aware of. So I think it does that really well. If you're someone who faces these issues, then it's probably not as beneficial for you. It's probably a lot of stuff that you already know or experience in your life. But as someone coming from the outside, I found it really helpful. All right, so the next book I have is the final revival of Opal and Nev by Dawnie Walton. So this is an adult fiction book. It follows the fictional singing duo of Opal and Nev, who were really big in the 70s, and then they're thinking of doing a reunion tour in the late 2010s. And this is written as though there's like an editor and she's writing an oral history of the duo. So it's really similar style to Daisy Jones and the Six, where a lot of it is written through interviews, and so it's primarily dialogue. One of the big differences in the writing style for this one is that the editor and the writer is in this a lot as well. So you see kind of the behind the scenes of her writing this and doing the research and all the interviews and stuff, trying to form this cohesive narrative of what happened to them, why weren't they together anymore, why are they kind of reluctant to do this reunion concert. In this, Opal is a black singer, she's the lead vocalist, and Nev is a white, I think he's a vocalist as well. But he's a white man and he is also one of the vocalists. He's the other part of this musical duo, and so the book talks a lot about the effects that their respective races and genders have on how they're perceived in the media and how they are treated. It also has a really interesting discussion about white allyship and performative allyship, but pretending to be a supporter of like the black people in your lives and then just doing it for clout basically, and not actually taking any meaningful steps towards helping the black people in your life. So I gave this one 5 stars. It did really give me some like Daisy Jones and the Six vibes in that it's about the musical scene in like 60s, 70s and written in an oral history style, but I think it had some really interesting things to say about race, like I said, having that like interracial duo and the ways that they kind of like clash due to their differences there, and also the inclusion of the editor having more of like a voice, the way that the editor is more present in this story and you know the link between her and this musical duo right off the bat. So yeah, I think if you like Daisy Jones and the Six, you should really read this one because it is just as good. The next book is A Sitting in St. James by Rita Williams-Garcia. So this is a young adult historical fiction novel, although I would say like young adult for like 18-plus-year-olds. It is incredibly graphic, and there's a ton of trigger warnings, including like rape, sexual assault, beatings, general things about slavery. And I'm not entirely sure why it's classified as young adult. It might be the writing style a little bit, or it might be that some of the characters are teens, but it's pretty intense. So I would not recommend this to anyone who is an actual teenager, to be honest. This is set during the 1860s on a plantation, and it follows multiple points of view. So you have some of the points of view of the enslaved people on the plantation, as well as the plantation owners and their lives as well. The main plot is that the plantation is falling on hard times. They're trying to like marry into other families to get money. The head of the household has decided she wants to sit for a portrait. She's like the grandma of the household. She wants to sit for a portrait. And so that's all happening in the context of a plantation with a whole bunch of like enslaved people working on it. And what I think this book does really well is that it reminds you that the plantation owners were people and that they weren't 1 in a million monsters doing this stuff. It was just your average everyday person committing these absolute atrocities and just being like, that's fine, it's just normal, whatever. But yeah, it puts you in the shoes of both the enslaved people who are undergoing all these atrocities, as well as the plantation owners who are ordering or committing these atrocities just like casually, no big deal, and makes you really realize how little they cared about the horrific things that they were doing to other people, and really like cements that mindset they had of the dehumanization of these enslaved people. So once again, a ton of trigger warnings. I would look into those before you start this book, but really good. I gave it 4 stars and quite intense. All right, so the next book we have is One of the Good Ones by Maika and Maritza Moulite. So this is a young adult contemporary novel that follows Happy, who is a black girl, and I think it's set around the like late 2010s, maybe even early 2020s. And it follows Happy, whose sister Kezi just died at like a rally for a social justice movement, kind of like mysteriously, and so she's grieving her sister, and her sister is kind of being heralded as one of the good ones and a face to like further the protests. So Happy feels kind of iffy about that because, you know, if she's one of the good ones, that implies that there's a lot of bad ones. And she decides to kind of like distance herself from all the social media stuff, and her other sister Jenny go on a road trip, and they use the Green Book, which was published in the, I want to say it's like 50s or 60s, and it was basically a guide for Black motorists at the time to tell them where it was safe to stay for the night, where to eat, what states were like sundown states, where if you were there after sundown, you were in mortal peril and you could get killed. So they kind of are following this relic from the past on their road trip as they bond, but also grieve their sister. So I gave this book 5 stars. I thought it was really well written, and it's like 2 sisters writing about a pair of sisters. So that was like a really cool parallel, because they're pairs. So I thought this talked really well about kind of public versus private grief, the idea of being like a perfect victim and how you had to be kind of innocent or blameless in your life in order to deserve justice or be, you know, a catalyst for change or like a martyr sort of. And the way that popular culture and like social media and stuff doesn't stick up for marginalized people who weren't perfect, and they're just kind of like, well, you know, they were doing something bad anyway, so maybe they deserved what they got, when of course we're all human and we all deserve not to be shot for existing. I thought it was really cool to see that being talked about when I feel like a lot of YA books that I've read have not discussed that aspect of racism. Alright, so the last few books I have to talk about. Are books that don't center like Black pain necessarily or racism, because it's important to read books that aren't just about Black people suffering all the time, but to also read books that center like Black joy and issues in their lives that aren't just about racism, because that's not the only facet in marginalized people's lives. The next book I have is My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. So this is set in Nigeria, and it follows our main character, Korede, whose sister, Eula, is a serial killer. She has a tendency of dating people and then killing them. And she has started to eye our main character's crush recently and is like, he's kind of cute. So the main character is like, no, can't do it. You can't date him and then murder him. And so she's been cleaning up her sister's other murders and is now trying to prevent her from dating and then subsequently murdering her crush. I gave this book 4 stars. I thought it was pretty funny. It's also like super short and like a really quick read, but it was really funny. It was nice having a book not set in North America, because a lot of the books that I consume tend to be set either in Canada or more often in the United States. And so it was nice to read a book from like a completely different continent and a bit of a different culture as well. And I definitely want to be reading more books from like places around the world that are different than just the North American experience. It was just really funny because the sister doesn't really care too much that she's killing people. She's like, oh no, what a horrible accident. And the main character is like, I have to learn how to clean bloodstains out of hotel rooms. So it has a really kind of frustrating and funny sister dynamic, as well as, you know, trying to stop your sister from being a serial killer without turning her into the authorities. So still kind of heavy topics, but it's not about racism this time. So the next book I have to recommend is Charming as a Verb by Philippe. So this is actually written by a Canadian author, which is great, but this is a young adult contemporary novel that follows Halty, who is a dog walker, and he's created this fake company of like professional dog walkers, where it's really just him and like some good tech skills. But his classmate Connie discovers that it's just him. There's not this big like professional network of dog walkers. And she blackmails him into becoming one of the cool kids and like helping her elevate her reputation, because right now she's kind of like the intense nerdy kid in the class. So he agrees to do this because he doesn't want to lose the money or the credibility from the dog walking business. And as they are going through this in high school, they start to become friends and they get closer. And it was just like a really nice story of Black teenagers just being teens and not having to deal too much with racism and stuff like that, and they could just have their own issues and, you know, be blackmailing each other and stuff, but without the like super heavy weight of race issues on their shoulders. I gave this book 4 stars. I thought this was like a really sweet and charming book and just had some really cute characters in it. So my last book is Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. This is an adult contemporary novel and it follows Grace, who is a bit of a perfectionist, and she has just completed her PhD and is going on a girls' trip to Las Vegas. While there, she gets drunk and accidentally marries a strange woman, only to wake up and find out that this has happened. They live on opposite sides of the country and never actually meeting the woman that she's married. So this follows kind of her trying to figure out that relationship a bit, but also her struggles post degrees, and she's out of university now. She doesn't know what to do with her life. She's experiencing a lot of burnout, and she also really feels the weight of her parents' expectations on her shoulders. I thought this was really beautifully written. I really liked the writing style in this. It had like a sweet romance, but I also think it did a really good job talking about those like post-secondary school feelings of like, now I have to be an adult, what the heck do I do with my life? And there were also some really good discussions around the idea of Black excellence and having to perform twice as well as your white counterparts in order to get the same amount of praise as them, as well as the discrimination she faced being a Black woman in a STEM field. And while there were those discussions about racism, more of the like overarching theme was the kind of loss of childhood, the finally like being an adult and what do I do, as well as experiencing like burnout and not knowing how to slow down and relax and feeling like you can't do that because of the expectations of others that sit on your shoulders. I gave this book 4 stars. It's really well written and it's got some really interesting characters, and it just gave me a lot of feels about the university life. So there were a couple other books I want to talk about, but this has already been a huge list, and I've talked about them before. So my other recommendations would be Felix Ever After by Kaysen Callender. I talked about that one in last week's video for my all-time favorite romances, so I'll have that linked up here somewhere. The other 2 are the Ray Bearer series by Jordan Fueko, as well as Somebody's Daughter by Ashley C. Ford, and both of those were in my top books of 2021 video, which I will also link up here, and I'll put those in the description as well. Those are all of the recommendations that I have for Black History Month. Let me know what your favorite books by Black authors are, if there's any that you're really looking forward to reading this month. I'd love to chat with you down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. I just explained it so well. No, keep recording. Okay. Because when I talked and I explained it to you, it was fine. I just need to gather my thoughts. No, I said that same twice. Fuck.